I'm Erica Lynn, and we all know the ocean is the most demanding environment on Earth, consistently testing the reliability and durability of our equipment. When you spend as much time fishing as I do, you know that reliable gear is essential for staying on the water. This is why I went with the Abyss battery to power my trolling motor, electronics, and outboard. The guys at Abyss Battery are rattling the saltwater industry by manufacturing performance marine batteries specifically designed for sonar, outboards, trolling motors, and electronic fishing reels. They're also Bluetooth compatible, so I found checking battery statuses right on your phone while you're out on the water is a huge game changer. To learn more about why Abyss batteries are used by the pros and factory installed by premier boat builders, visit abyssbattery.com.
Hello and welcome to the Publicly Challenged Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Oswald, and I hope you join me on my quest for knowledge to become a better public land hunter, angler, and forager. Stick with this and who knows, maybe we will learn something together. Okay, so I'm sitting here and I have Stan Tekiela on the line, and we are going to be talking foraging as well as some other things to keep you occupied while you may be in quarantine. So, Stan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, hi, Luke. How you doing? So, as you said, my name's Stan Tekiela, and I'm an author and a naturalist and a wildlife photographer. Where do I start? I have a degree from the University of Minnesota in natural history, so which basically means I'm a wildlife biologist who teaches, and that's what basically. Oftentimes, when I introduce myself as a naturalist, people oftentimes will go, they'll kind of envision somebody running through the woods naked, and I'll have to remind them that that's a naturist, and that a naturalist is an educator about the great big world around us. And it may be about plants, it may be about animals, it may be about the sky, the rocks, whatever it may be, and it's kind of the big picture of things. And I educate through a variety of different channels, if you will. First, I'm the director of the Starring Lake Nature Center in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and so we have thousands of school kids and summer campers, kids that come for camp and learning about nature and things like that at the Nature Center, and that's a big avenue. I'm also write a syndicated newspaper column, and that column goes across about 9 or 10 states with about 750,000 readers. And I believe you're familiar with the Outdoor News, which is one of the publications I write for.
Yep.
And I do a variety of radio shows. So I've got a couple of shows that I do in a variety in different places: Grand Forks, North Dakota, Fargo, Moorhead, out of the Twin Cities area. So things like that. And I also do Outdoor News Radio, which is kind of a fun show that comes out daily. And then in addition to kind of the newspaper column and teaching at the Nature Center and all like that, I write books. So believe it or not, as a kid, growing up in the Chicagoland area, I dreamed of writing nature books. That was just something I always wanted to do. And so even as a kid, I had a 3-ring binder, and I would handwrite in the notes, because I was convinced somehow that I would be able to go out and write a book and teach people about the nature in their own backyard that they didn't know about. And so I would write, in this book, I'd handwrite all the stuff in there, and then I would take pictures, and I would, they'll take the prints and glue them in there and all that stuff. And so I continued on doing that all the way through my youth. And then about a little over 30 years ago, I don't know, 31, 32 years ago, I met up with a couple who was starting a brand new publishing company called Adventure Publications out of Cambridge, Minnesota. And they took a chance on me, brought me on as one of their very first authors that they had at this publishing house, this new publishing house. And I got to realize my lifelong dream of writing a nature book. And I was thrilled. And then nobody said stop. So I kept going, and here we are 31 years later, and I just hit my 200th book, and it's been a pretty good ride. So that's been a big part of what I do is the writing for those books. And then I'm a wildlife photographer also. I have no training in the wildlife photography at all. It just kind of came about as a necessary evil because I wanted to illustrate certain things in my books. And so, long ago, back in the film days, I started photographing and learned how to take good wildlife images, and kind of continued on with that. So a little bit of everything in there, just to, it's classic. I also do record audio sounds for, well, a variety of different things. I sell them as ringtones and as ways in which for people to relax, educational CDs on how to identify different birds, so on and so forth. So, and like anything, it takes 4 or 5 different revenue streams in order to make one living. So you got to do 4 or 5 jobs to make one living, and
Yeah.
that's just kind of how it goes. Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
so I know a lot of your books, and I'm pretty sure you've wrote a book about birds for all 50 states. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
all except for Hawaii and Nevada. So Nevada, because there's not enough people there in the state to buy the books, and Hawaii because the publisher really never had a distribution chain for to getting it to Hawaii. So I never did that. But all the other states I've got covered. So if you've got a small little field guide called "The Birds of" whatever state you happen to be in, that's the books that I write. I started these books about 25 years ago, and I've written field guides for, well, I've done field guide for the birds for every state except for Nevada and Hawaii, and then, but I've gone on to do other field guides too. I did a field guide for the trees of many states, and wildflowers, the mammals of these states. So, and there's you can find most of this stuff. I have an Amazon author page too, so people can go to Amazon and go to the author pages and find my name, and they can see it. Or just simply just type in my name on Amazon, and you'll see.
Right.
There's quite a few publications there.
And then children's books as well. I mean,
Yeah,
you've kind of done quite a few books here.
yeah. So I've done a lot of kids books. I enjoy the children's books because in compared to doing a field guide, which is so labor intensive. I mean, it is just horrendous the amount of work that has to go into these things. The children's books are a nice reprieve from that, and I can have more fun with it, and I can write, but the difference between my kids' books and other kids' books is my information is technically accurate. So as a wildlife biologist, I kind of make sure that everything is technically correct. I don't want to be putting out information that's not true. And so in the back of all my kids' books, I have this educational material that is meant for a parent or a grandparent or a guardian or whoever it may be, that they can read also and teach the children and pass along that information also.
I like that. I really do. It's just one of those things. So many of the books that I read to my children are so inaccurate about animal
Yes.
noises and different things. And
Yeah.
we recently bought some new books. They're called Smile Outside, and they're 2% for conservation. And so 2% of the money and 2% of their time goes towards conservation efforts
Hmm.
and different things. And it's just a breath of fresh air to get a book like yours or get a book like theirs and be able to read something to the kid to where they're actually learning something. Like the most recent one was antlers, and it's actually accurate on what animal has antlers or what animal has horns versus antlers and things that people just mix things up all the time, and so many people
Yeah.
just don't know the actual facts about nature, and it's just kind of
Yeah.
annoying to somebody who does, and now you're trying to read a book to your kid and they're getting a misconception of things, and
Yeah.
that's refreshing. I like that.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you appreciate that because it's funny. And you brought up antlers and horns because that's one of my pet peeves. One of the radio shows that I do on a regular basis, a couple guys, the host of the show and all that, are they're classic hunters. But they've they've learned from other hunters, I'm not bashing hunters here, but they tend to get things mixed up, or they tend to use slang, or they tend to use colloquial words that are not correct. So they'll often say, "Oh, check out the horns on that deer," and people like me just cringe, and it's like, no, they're not horns, and it's not just a technicality. There is a huge difference between horns and antlers, and so I spend a lot of time trying to educate them or re-educate them about things, and that's a fun way for people to learn too, to get it right, and so it's because it's to be accurate on it makes you a better person. It really does. I mean, when you're technically accurate on things, then you're going to have a better, overall argument or point or whatever it may be. So
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about being in the uncertain, strange times that we're living in right now with what's going on in the world, and most of us being at home. What are some things as far as bird watching or birds that we can look at and look out our window? Maybe some games or something that we can play with our kids. Something that's common to the throughout the United States, I guess I would say.
so at this time of year, so we got early spring, late winter, early spring. There is so much going on, and I think it's important for people to get outside and to get some sunshine, get some fresh air. And when you do, if you stop and take a moment to look, there are so many signs of spring all around. It is everything from the birds that are singing, the migration that is happening at the moment. Sandhill cranes are showing up all over the place right now. They've spent their winters down south, and now they're coming up into the northern states and moving through. We've got our cardinals are singing on territory, and one of the more interesting things about cardinals is the not only the male sings a song, but the female also sings a song, and they sing in duets back and forth. And oftentimes, when they sing this, they'll mirror each other in the sound. So the sound sounds exactly the same. But if you record them and look at their songs in a spectrograph, in a sonogram, so you can actually see what they're doing, you can see the differences between them. So when you and I hear it, we hear the same thing, but technically they are not singing the same things. They're singing different things. And presumably, the male and the female cardinal can tell that difference, and they're able to. It means something to them too. So there's a lot going on there. You can look out your back window at this time of year and see squirrels chasing each other. So the eastern gray squirrel, this is the common squirrel that most people have in their yards, and they're chasing each other around. This is not just aggression. This is actually the mating chase. Males are chasing females for the mating season. And so there's things going on there. Chipmunks have just come out of hibernation and they're running around. So there's a lot of things that can be seen if you stop and take a look. And then more importantly, try to see these things for what they are. Try not to interpret them with human judgment, human kind of expectations, and things like that. Because we almost always, when we do things like that, we get it wrong. We don't get it right when we try to look at something and try to match it up to our own human experience. You can learn from it by just simply watching it and learning and watching their behavior and taking it from there. Does that make any sense to you?
Absolutely. I try and teach my children the same thing that humans are way more complex than animals, and animals pretty much have just a few basic needs, and that's survival and nutrition and mating, and obviously the care for their young for mammals and things like that. And yeah, so that makes sense to look at it through that light and just notice their behaviors are precise actions that are followed through those needs.
Yeah. So I would say you're mostly right there, but perhaps if you looked at it slightly different with it. So I just pointed out the fact that a very common bird, the northern cardinal, is a bird that most everybody's familiar with, right? And yet it sings, the male and the female both sing a song, and even though they sound the same, they are technically different, and they can tell the difference. So I would argue that it's just the opposite, that the birds and the animals have more complex than you and I have. For example, you and I see in three different colors: red, green, and blue, and that's it. So that gives our 7 colors of light, the Roy G. Biv. This is the ROYGBIV, and we see those 7 colors of light because we have 3 cones in our eyes that receive green, blue, and green, or red light. That's it. Birds have 4 cones in their eyes that allows them to see in the RGB plus ultraviolet. So they can see things that we cannot see. So I would argue that people try to interpret things and see things as like a human would, and not give the possibilities that there are more things beyond that. For example, have you ever wondered how birds that look the same, like crows or blue jays or sandhill cranes and all that, the males and the females look the same? Do you ever wonder how they tell the difference between each other?
No, I never thought of it.
Well, let's just concentrate on blue jays, for example. Blue jays is a common backyard bird. People can look out the window and see it, right?
Yep.
And they look the same, but presumably they got to be able to tell the difference between the boys and the girls. I mean, what do? Fly over to each other, lift up their tails, look underneath, and ask them, or I mean, what do they do? And the answer is that under UV light, they reflect different patterns. And those patterns are seen by the birds. So they see just fine which one's a male and which one's a female. It's you and me. We can't see it, but we presume it to be one way, and we almost always presume it to be the wrong way. So we're almost always inaccurate when we try to project our human kind of our ability to see, our ability to hear, our ability to smell, our ability to taste. And worse yet, our human emotions. We try to project those onto the wildlife. We're almost always wrong, and because we're not doing it. So, but if you observe wildlife more in a way of just observing and taking it in, and trying not to kind of figure it out, because as people, what do we want to do? We always want to figure out, why do they do justification for this or justification for that, and oftentimes there isn't anything like that. It's more of a kind of they're doing it for a different reason that we would not even think of. And I could go on and on about all these different types of things. So it's just a different way of looking at it. And when you open up your mind to those types of possibilities, then all of a sudden things start to become more clear to you. And it's a really interesting world out there.
It is. It is. I like just observing without, like you said, without trying to make it relatable or make it anything, and just take it for what it is. And most of the time you can actually learn from that more so.
Exactly.
Yes. So I got a question for you, Stan. How did you get to how did you get to learn all the plants or the different flora and fauna that you did? Like, what led you to that, to where now you wrote a book quite some years ago, actually, the first edition of Start Mushrooming the Reliable Way?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, for some odd reason, even as a kid, I was interested in this stuff. I can't remember a time in when I wasn't fascinated by nature, when I wasn't fascinated by or wanting to know, when I went for a walk, what are all these plants? What are all these mushrooms? What are all these birds? So on and so forth. I just had that in me. And so from a very young age, I always was trying to identify all the plants around me. And so I would, I had old Golden guides and, some Peterson guides and things like that, some of the original field guides that came out in the mid 1900s. And I used those books to try to figure out what the heck I was seeing. And so it was kind of, a lot of that was self-taught. And then later on, I went to the University of Minnesota and kind of a fairly broad degree as a naturalist from a variety of different colleges. So from the College of Natural Resources and the College of Biological Sciences, and was able to kind of pull the whole thing together. To be, because as a naturalist, you're kind of a jack of all trades. You know a lot about all the different things, but you're really a master of nothing. And so that's kind of the direction I've always been in. For some reason, I can I can I can meet a plant and meet a bird, and it will stick with me forever. I'll remember its name. I'll remember everything about it. But you and I will hang up, and 10 minutes later, I won't remember your name. you know. So
That's
I
kind of
don't.
funny.
Yeah, it's just who I am. I'm just
Yep.
bent that way. It's just, and it's not like I couldn't change it even if I wanted to. It's just how it is. And so it's just one of those things that I don't know. And it's been a good career for me. It's been a good kind of a good run, if you will.
So let's talk about, especially with people being cooped up and not wanting
Yeah.
to go to grocery stores and social distancing and whatnot right now. It's crazy. I can't believe we're living in this. But so in your book, you have 7 mushrooms
Yeah.
that are considered the safe 7.
Yeah.
Would you like to name them, or do you want me to? Or
Well, let me just start out by saying that there's over 1 million types of mushrooms. Um, and mushrooms, by the way, are just the fruiting body of a fungus. So we'd have to kind of dive into a little bit more about the actual organism itself if we wanted to. But and so no one person can be an expert in all types of mushrooms. You just can't. There's just too many to know. There's with 1 million different species out there, it's pretty hard to kind of figure out what the heck is going on, right?
right,
So what I tried to do is there are people who want to know, like me, who want to know all the mushrooms. They want to look at all the mushrooms and be able to identify all of them. And then there's other people who want to just collect for the table. They just want to, collect some mushrooms to be able to eat. And so what I tried to do was put together a book that would cover kind of the 3 main seasons, spring, summer, and fall for mushroom hunting, and give you simple, common, edible mushrooms that don't have a lot of poisonous lookalikes and stop you from killing yourself, basically is it. So that's the bottom line. And I settled in on 7. It used to be in the original edition, which I did close to 30 years ago. It was 6 common mushrooms, and when I redid the Start Mushrooming book, I added a 7th one to it, and that's the chanterelle. And so it's just an extra kind of one more mushroom for you to go out and hunt. Because honestly, I don't think most people are interested in going out and identifying all of them. They just want to collect a few things for the table. This basically goes back to a time when I was a child. My father would come home with wild mushrooms that he would collect. My His parents, so my grandparents, are Polish immigrants, and they had that classic European, collect the mushrooms type mentality, and he learned it from his folks, and then I kind of learned it from him. And it's been something I've just kind of carried on doing, and it's been something that's been really fun to do. I think most people are familiar with the morel mushroom. That's our kind of a springtime mushroom. Is that something that you've gone out,
Eh,
Luke, and
yes,
hunted
yes, I
for?
have
Yeah.
absolutely. I love
And your
morel hunting.
success and your success has been how?
Uh, fairly high.
Good.
I've got
Good.
a few secret spots which I will not divulge at this time. Um,
Yes.
yes, and some of them are on ground that is actually close to the public right now. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, I won't be able to get out there in a couple weeks and start looking. So hopefully
Yeah.
this all changes and and we're able to go on public ground. But I also have a few private spots that do rather well. And like I
Yeah.
said, I'm not going to give those up because they are the coveted mushroom of all mushrooms.
Yeah, they are, and it's really something that it's the hunt. People like that hunt. They like to get out there and search for them. And the morel mushroom is there's probably 7 or 9 different species of morels, depending on who you talk to about that. And but they're all share similar characteristics that make them fairly foolproof. I mean, there is some poisonous lookalikes to them, like the gyromitra. It's a mushroom that comes up later in the year. Sometimes it comes up in the spring, and To me, they don't look anything at all like, but I see people routinely make that mistake. They will collect up these gyromitras and thinking it's a kind of an odd morel, and which is interesting because these gyromitras have monomethylhydrazine in them. And are you familiar with monomethylhydrazine?
Nope, not exactly.
Yeah, it's rocket fuel basically.
Okay.
And some people can eat it with no problems whatsoever, and other people eat it and become violently ill. And some people can eat it several times and not have any reactions, and then all of a sudden they'll have a reaction to it. So this is not something you want to be messing with. You won't die from it, but you'll kind of get sick enough where you wish you might die. And so it's a you got to be careful what you're doing out there. And so what I did was I developed like a 6-point checkoff system, so that if you can say yes to each of these kind of checkoffs, you can be sure that you've got the right mushroom, because it's really, really easy to kill yourself with mushrooms. And maybe we should talk about mushroom poisoning for a minute, because it's kind of a gruesome topic, but it's
Yes,
something
let's
that
talk about it.
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with mushroom poisonings, we oftentimes see something on television, a movie or a sitcom or something like that, where somebody takes one bite of the mushroom and they grasp at their throat and they choke and whatever, spit, and they fall off their chair and they're dead. And that is like the furthest thing from the truth. In fact, the vast majority of people who have eaten these deadly poisonous mushrooms, like the Amanita, all have reported it tasted great. And so that's our first problem. Second problem is the main symptoms don't show up until about 72 hours after you've consumed that wild mushroom. So 72 hours is like 3 days later. I don't know about you, but I have a tough time remembering what I had for breakfast, So I don't know. I mean, later on, 3 days later, it's pretty tough to recall what the heck you're having. And those first symptoms are coming about due to liver failure. So the main thing that you're doing is, when you eat these Amanita mushrooms, the aminotoxins inside there destroy your liver. And so the very first symptoms you get are symptoms of liver failure. And the treatment for this is a liver transplant. Most people can live about a week or so after eating these deadly mushrooms, and then so about 7-8 days. And if they don't get a liver transplant, they die. And so it's a long, drawn out, horrible death that you certainly don't want to do. So that's why you got to be really careful. Worse yet, these Amanita mushrooms look almost identical to the store-bought white mushrooms that you buy, in the store, a package of those white button mushrooms.
Yes.
These Amanitas look just like them. And so they're hard to tell apart. Even so much so that I don't even mess around with anything that's small and white, or even medium-sized and white. I don't mess around with them at all, because you're too close to those Amanitas, and it's just too scary.
Yeah. I I'm looking right now at them. So
Are you looking at the Death Angel?
the death cap.
Yeah,
Yep.
the Death Cap. Yeah, so it's a pure white mushroom with a single stalk in it. Has gills underneath it, just like the store-bought mushrooms. And there's really only a few things different. One of the things is it grows from a vulva. The vulva is a cup at the base, and oftentimes that's underground, so you don't see it. The second difference there is that the gills tend to be white on the Amanitas, but the gills are pinkish on the store-bought ones. But they both turn dark. Both of the gills turn dark with age. So otherwise, they're pretty darn similar to each other, and it's really kind of hard to tell apart.
Yeah, that's a good one to stay away from.
Yeah, anything that looks like store-bought mushrooms, stay away from it.
Yes, yes. So let's talk about morels. And so obviously this is the time of year. Typically people want to look around what type of trees.
So generally speaking, depending on what part of the country you're in, it's more the month of May. So April, the end of April, beginning of May is when these things are around. And interestingly, morel mushrooms are found globally. They're found all over the planet. They're not just kind of a North American type of thing. And you can find them associated with different types of trees depending on what part of the country you're in. So in the upper Midwest, we oftentimes associated them with dead elm trees. So back in the 70s and 80s, Dutch elm disease came through and was killing off a lot of our elm trees. That was the heyday for morel mushrooms. I mean, they were just popping up all over the place. And nowadays, we still find them associated with dead elms, but we also find them on kind of south-facing hillsides. I've found them growing in my lawn. Just I was mowing the lawn and there's one, popped out. So
Yep.
they are where they grow. That's kind of a good saying for that.
Yep.
Other places they're associated with ash trees. So, for example, in Illinois, they're associated with ash trees, and sometimes they're associated with prickly ash, which is, by the way, not related to the ash tree at all. So there's different ways of finding them. Generally speaking, they're like wolves. They travel in packs, and so if you see one, there's oftentimes many more around. The trick to finding these things is to get down low and look across the ground. Don't look for them kind of standing upright and then looking down at them because they're harder to see. But if you kind of crouch down, look out in front of you, scan in front of you, you'll be able to see these things. One of the tricks that I've always found is that if you take a picture of a morel or kind of some symbol of a morel and look at it first, kind of stare at it, get your eyes fixed on it and get your brain thinking about that size, the shape, the color, and all that stuff. When you look for them, they'll pop out to you more because once you find one, oftentimes all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, and if you look, there's another, and then there's another, and then you realize there's one right between your feet, and so there's different. They're kind of all over the place, and I always like to say they're pretty sneaky. And usually, when you find one, you look for more.
That's my biggest takeaway, or anybody that's listening to this. If you find a morel, stop and place right where you are,
Yeah,
because
don't move. Yeah,
chances are you're going to move, you're going to step on them. They're all
yeah,
around. If you find one, you're going to find many.
exactly. That's exactly it too. Yeah. So, how do you know you found a morel? Well, the one of the main things you can do is the cap is covered with pits and ridges. So they got these kind of flat ridges on all over it and with little pits all over it. And if you take a knife and cut it lengthwise and open it up, the inside of it is hollow like a straw. And that's very important because the gyromitras, this is something we were talking about earlier that can be confused with the morel. They have a cottony material inside or a solid stem. And so that's one of the big dead giveaways between the two of them. And people make that mistake all the time. Um, Quite a few years ago, I was at a mushroom festival in Michigan, and there was a local restaurant that was offering like a 3-course dinner with morel mushrooms. And so I was sitting down with some of the most notable mushroom people around, and we were all having this dinner together with our spouses, and we were having this 3-course meal, all featuring morel mushrooms. And when my dinner came out to me, which I think was a chicken breast or something like that, they set it down right in front of me. I took one look at it and was like, "That's a gyromitra mushroom." On top of my chicken.
Wow.
And it was, of all the people to set it in front of, it was like, are you kidding me? This is funny. Called the waiter back and showed it to him, explained it to him. The cook came out and he took a look at it, and it was like, dude, you can't, you can't be serving up gyromitras. Where'd you get these? And he's like, well, just somebody comes to the back door and they got a bag full and they sold them to us,
Oh,
and
wow.
so you got to be real careful in those situations that you're eating the right thing. So,
Yes. Wow, that's interesting.
hmm
So let's talk about the shaggy mane, because that's one that you can actually it's more than just in the springtime, right?
yeah, the shaggy mane oftentimes grows in like your lawn. This is the white. Has a conical shaped cap on it with a lot of little shaggy curls on it. And it is an interesting mushroom in that and maybe this is where we need to back up a little bit and talk to people about what is a mushroom. I mean, do you want to take Luke, you want to take a stab at what the heck a mushroom is?
What is a mushroom?
Yeah,
Like
what's a mushroom?
mushroom is extension of the mycelium or something that's breaking down the fibers of wood or other organisms within the soil or on a tree.
Well, that's a good explanation of the fungus, but the mushroom itself, the above ground thing, is
Oh,
actually
you
I
mean
kind of
like the
mentioned it earlier.
pollinator or the spreader
Yes,
of? Yes, yes.
there you go. It's the fruiting body of the fungus. So if the analogy would be this, you've got an apple tree, right? And that apple tree is growing, and at the right time of year, it needs to reproduce. Okay, because remember, everything in nature all boils down to, just like you said, boils down to finding food and reproduction. Those two things, everything's boiled down to that. And so they need to reproduce. This apple tree needs to reproduce. So what does it do? It has flowers. Those flowers are pollinated, and that pollinated flower gives forth to the apple. Inside the apple are the seeds. This is how that tree reproduces itself. So it wants some animal to eat the apple, to ingest the seeds, walk away. The seeds pass through the digestive system. They come out the other side. They land on the ground, and boom, a new place for an apple tree to grow. So that's the fruiting body of the apple tree. With fungus, the mushroom is the fruiting body. It is the part that allows that fungus to reproduce, except the differences are plants have seeds, fungus have spores. They're fundamentally different from each other. Okay, and the spores tend to be microscopic. You don't see them, and so the morel mushroom comes up, and on those pits and ridges of that mushroom, in those pits are little ascomycetes. These ascomycetes are little bat-shaped things that inside of them are spores. And so as long as that mushroom is sticking up above ground, it's giving off spores. It's reproducing. To prove this, simply take your morel mushroom or take, any mushroom like that and lay it on a piece of white or black paper, and then put a bowl over the top of it to stop the wind currents from carrying away the spores, and then wait about 12 hours. When you lift it up and take a look at it, what you're going to see is hundreds of millions, if not trillions, of spores that have fallen down onto the paper. And you can see this. And so that's what the fruiting body's for casting off these spores. Now, getting back to the shaggy mane, which is what we started talking about there, the shaggy mane is there. It's a fruiting body, but it needs to spread its spores. How does it do that? It auto-digests. It breaks itself down and becomes liquid to the point where it's a black liquid, almost like black ink. And whatever plant is underneath it becomes coated with this black liquid, this mess, if you will. And then an animal comes along, a grazer, grazes on that plant, ingests all those spores, it passes through the digestive system, and guess what? Boom, you got new shaggy mane mushrooms growing at the new place, wherever it was dropped. So there's all sorts of ways in which these fungi are trying to reproduce, just like any other animal or insect or bird or whatever.
Yep, I find it. I've never actually found one, or actually, well, maybe I found them, but never hunted the shaggy mane myself. But I plan on it. I plan on doing it this spring and summer.
So it's an interesting species, the shaggy mane. You can oftentimes find it right in your lawn. It's a very common lawn type thing, unless you're using a lot of chemicals and things like that. You certainly don't want to be harvesting mushrooms out of your lawn if you're using, some lawn spray service type of thing that's going to, be putting down a lot of different chemicals. That would be unhealthy. And it's a mushroom that, since it auto-digests, since it breaks itself down, soon as you collect it, you have to cut it up, cook it, and eat it. Otherwise, it break down, turn to black ink, right? And make a heck of a mess in your refrigerator. The only way to get around that is if you took like of the bottom part of an egg container and take the mushroom and you set it in that egg container upside down so that its stalk is sticking straight up in the air and the cap is down inside that little cup. And then it won't auto digest at that point. So that's kind of an interesting thing. You have to be a little bit careful with the shaggy mane. The genus and species name is Coprinus comatus. And this coprinus is in all of the coprinuses auto-digest. They all break down into ink, right? There's one, though, it's called the alcohol inky. It's a species of coprinus that has chemicals in it that are not pleasant when mixed with alcohol. There's a drug called antabuse.
That's exactly what I was going to. It's funny that, but
yeah,
yes.
there's a drug called antabuse that's given to people who are trying to recover from alcoholism, and it's a medication that they take, and they have no effects from it whatsoever until they drink alcohol. And when they drink alcohol, they become very ill, and then they associate that bad, illness with the alcohol. And so the alcohol inky has that chemical in it. And so you got to be careful which coprinus you're trying to collect. So now all of a sudden, these safe 7 are becoming a little muddied, aren't they? And so it's something that you need to be aware of. And oftentimes, like we as people, we're classic in that we think, I know this stuff, I got it figured out. And yet you didn't know that there was an alcohol inky. You didn't know that there was this drug that'll cause you to be ill if you, had a glass of wine with your dinner, and that type of thing. So there's so much going on in nature, and it's so vast, it's so complex, and there's so many things going on that I am often find myself humbled by anything going on in nature.
I myself am an eternal student when it comes to nature. That's the
Yeah.
way I like to look at it because I'm constantly learning. But so let's talk about, even with shaggy mane or any of these mushrooms, you've got something that's considered the checkoff guide that you've come up with, and it's
Yeah.
pretty foolproof, but not completely bulletproof. But at least it gets you dialed into where you're almost certain or positive of these mushrooms. So one would be season, and then habitat. Where the
hmm
mushroom is. I mean, do you want to go over those a little bit?
Well, the season should be explanatory, because if you're finding what you think are morel mushrooms in the fall, you're probably wrong, because they come out in the springtime.
Right.
Or habitat's important because these are very specific habitat organisms. In other words, they're only going to be on certain things. So, for example, the oyster mushroom is always going to be growing on wood, because that's what it is. It's a saprophyte, and it's breaking down wood. Whereas the morel mushroom is going to be always on the ground in the soils. And so if you're finding a morel growing out of a tree branch, it's probably not a morel. So that's kind of the direction of these things go. And it may seem simple right now, it may seem fairly basic, but a lot of people seem to confuse these things. And if you just can say yes to each one of these things, then you're going to be a whole lot safer than what you were. Let me tell you a little story about myself. I was out with 2 other, I would consider them expert mushroom people. Certainly know more than I do about mushrooms. And we were out not collecting for the table, but collecting just for study and for learning these things and finding different types of mushrooms, identifying them correctly and all that, which involved picking them up and handling them, but we weren't collecting any of them. We weren't bringing any home, if you will. And throughout the day when we were in the woods, occasionally I would pull out a field guide that I had, which has like very thin paper pages. And I was trying to, because my hands were dirty and all that, I was trying to turn the pages. And because I was having troubles turning the pages, I absent-mindedly touched my index finger to my tongue to moisten it to turn the page. And I did that once, and I thought to myself, oh, you idiot, don't do that, you know? And I was like, just that was dumb. And so I identified what it was. We moved on. A little bit later in the day, I did it a second time. Again, absentmindedly, just touched my index finger to my tongue just to moisten it to turn the page. And I thought, oh, you idiot, don't do this, And sure enough, within a couple hours, I was flat out sicker than a dog. I mean, it was like, holy mackerel bad. And that's kind of one of those things. It's interesting that the deadly ones will take days for the symptoms to show up, but the non-deadly ones, you get sick fairly quick. So the faster you get sick, the better you're going to be.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So, um, one thing that I know of and probably tell people about morels is apple orchards. Not that great of a place, especially if it's an older apple orchard with a bunch of dead apple trees.
Mm-hmm.
Not that great of a place to go mushroom hunting for morels. Would you agree with that one there?
I would agree with you. A lot of people say that they're very good places. I've not had much success with those. So I would agree with you on that the apple orchards don't seem to do very well for me, at
Well,
least.
that and on top of the fact that morels are actually pick up a lot of things that are in the soil, and when they
Yes.
used to spray the apple trees back in the day with the lead arsenic to prevent the bugs from getting and eating the apples. It's not so good to eat, and you can
Yeah.
actually poison yourself with morels.
Yeah, you can poison yourself with any of those ancillary chemicals that are being sprayed in the environment.
Yes.
So yeah, you gotta be careful where you're collecting them from, things like that too. So
Yeah.
there's other edibles out there that are kind of fun. The puffball is an amazing mushroom. When you collect it, when it's ready to go, it's usually the size of a softball or even a soccer ball. They tend to be huge, round, white mushrooms that are really remarkable, So with the puffballs, they can be quite large. In fact, size of a softball or up to a soccer ball even. And they're fresh when you cut them in half and they're pure white inside. So there's no yellow, no greening to them. There's no kind of wrinkling to them. They got to be nice and firm and white. Uh, what's interesting about these gastromycetes, these are these. Remember, we talked a little bit about how the morel mushroom kind of gave off its spores in those little pits and ridges on the cap of it, and then with the shaggy mane, we talked about how they turn to ink, and that liquid then is passed on as spores. Well, with the puffball, all those spores are inside. So if you were to wait and let that go to maturity, it would turn kind of a yellowish green inside. And then when you touched it, be millions, if not billions, of spores would come puffing out of it, hence the name puffball, because they puff out with these clouds of spores. And so you can see those spores because there's so many of them and they're all together. And now, but when you find it and it's pure white inside and a nice smooth texture, you can cut those like 1 inch thick and make little mushroom steaks out of them and fry them up in a frying pan with some butter. Be warned, though, they suck up a lot of butter. So, and you can make little steaks out of them and flip them and then cook the other side of them too. I oftentimes will dice those up. And when I dice them up, I cook them a little faster that way too. And that works out nicely for cooking the puffballs. One of my favorite things to do with any of the wild mushrooms I get is to take the excess that I have and dry them. Drying mushrooms is an easy process. You can do it in a variety of different ways. But this drying, I think, is the best way to store them long term. However, with the puffball mushroom, you don't want to try drying it, because if you got one of these fancy food dryers and you kind of cut it up and put it in the food dryer, your house will stink of kind of smelly gym shoes. It's just awful. So you don't want to do that. But you can dry your morels really nicely, or the shaggy manes. It's a little bit of a trick to try to dry those. Again, you have to turn them upside down, and then you can dry them. One of the simpler ways to dry any mushroom is to cut it up into small pieces. and then take those. Don't maybe take about a cupful and put it in a paper bag, and then take that paper bag and put it in your refrigerator. All modern refrigerators dehydrate. They take the moisture out of the air. And so within a week's period of time, you'll have a bag full of dried mushrooms in your refrigerator. And that's kind of a fun and quick and easy way to dry a lot of mushrooms.
Really, I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's something interesting. Now, what about like a string method or hanging them to dry or something like
I,
that?
I like the string method. You take a kind of a stout string and a fairly stout, needle, and you kind of thread them on there. You kind of poke it through the mushroom, and then you can hang it up. The only problem I have with that is that by the time it's dried enough, which they dry out fairly quickly, especially if you put them in front of an open window or something like that, they tend to get a little dust on them, a little cobwebby, and a little, and so that's the only thing I don't like about that. But you can, once they're dried, you can take these mushrooms and put them in a sealed glass jar, and those mushrooms will last a long time. And you can save them and reuse them later on. And you can reconstitute those mushrooms by taking a handful of those mushrooms and putting them in warm water. And the water will soak back into the mushroom, rehydrating it partially. And then you can take those mushrooms, you squeeze out the extra water, and you go ahead and cook with them. The best part about it is the water that you use, that warm water that you use to soak them in, is going to be a nice kind of a brown, um, fragrant water, which you could use as a mushroom soup stock. So there's all sorts of things you can do there too. It's really, mushrooms are a great thing to have, and they're fun to have around, and they're tasty.
Sometimes I reconstitute mine with wine
There
and
you
then
go.
cook them in the wine and use the whatever's left over in the pan and make a roux or different things. You could
Now you're thinking.
put it over
Yeah.
a piece of chicken with some nice morels, something like that.
Oh,
Yep.
loving it.
Yeah. So there, I mean, there's definitely a lot you could do.
Mhm.
Your book is a great book, especially for a beginner. So I do recommend that. It's Start Mushrooming: The Reliable Way to Forage by Stan Tekiela, and you can find it on Amazon, like you said. Um, it's a good one. Stan, is there anything else or a place that people can reach out and find you?
Yeah, they can go to my website at naturesmart.com. And there's a bi-weekly newspaper column that appears there. My books are listed there. I also have photo tours that a lot of people like to learn about their photography by going out with me, and I take them out for specific things. And there's information about my photo tours there. You can go photograph black bears with me or common loons, these types of things. So there's lots of information at naturesmart.com.
I like it. So before we get going here, I got to ask you, what is your all-time favorite mushroom and what is the recipe that you do with it?
Well, for me, I really like the hen of the woods. The hen of the woods is Graphola frondosus. It's such a wonderful um, mushroom. It grows at the bases of oak trees, maple trees, and it can be quite large. It's called hen of the woods because it looks like there's a chicken hen kind of crouched down, if you will. And so it grows about the size of a chicken, if you will. You can get about 2-3 pounds of mushrooms. It's got a great texture to it. It's firm, and it's got a great flavor to it. So you can, when you cook morels, they tend to get a little, soft, a little slimy, and and a lot of people don't like that. These things stay firm when you cook them, and they're fantastic. And I like to do kind of like a of mushrooms with a white sauce on a fettuccine with them, and I really enjoy that type of cooking.
That sounds really good. I uh I actually I don't know if it was just because I ate absolutely so much of them, but had a little bit of gastrointestinal discomfort from the last batch that I ate. And
Hen of the woods.
yes, yes.
So, can we talk about that for a second, or do we have to go?
No, we can talk about it.
Yeah, because it's interesting. All right. So, that's a common problem if you eat too much of them.
Hmm.
Now, plants are made of cellulose. Cellulose is a kind of a material that's easily broken down in our digestive system. fungi, these mushrooms, are not a plant. They're mainly made of chitin. Chitin is the same material that your hair or your fingernails are made out of. And it is very difficult to digest. And so if you eat too much of them, you will get this kind of gastrointestinal upset, and because you're having a tough time breaking them down. So you always want to eat moderate amounts. You don't want to overindulge in any of the mushrooms too. So,
and I believe that was what
that.
happened. Because I've eaten them many times before without any problems. And
it's very common problem.
Yeah, but how can you not, right? They're so good.
Right, they're so darn good. I'm glad you like the Hen of the Woods. It's one of my absolute favorites.
You know what the best part is I'm already in the woods, Stan. So I'm either early season scouting, or if it happens to roll into, like this year, it was kind of unseasonably warm before that brutal cold snap, and we were all the way into towards the end of October, and I was in the woods hunting. I was deer hunting and still finding them. And so when I had a bad day deer hunting, it didn't matter because I still came home with a bunch of Hen of the Woods mushrooms.
Yeah, I like them. They're some of my absolute all-time favorites.
I still have to say the morels are my favorites, and I just like pan frying them. And if you get a higher heat, I crisp up the edges a little bit, and it's like got a beefy taste to it to me. That is unlike any other. But I agree. Well, I appreciate.
Very good.
Yeah, I appreciate you for coming on. Is there anything else you'd like to say, or?
No, it's just I'll leave you with this. There are old and bold mushroom hunters, but there are no old, bold mushroom hunters. Be careful out there.
That's a good one. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right.
And once again, thank you so much for listening to the Publicly Challenged podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please subscribe on whatever platform it is you're listening to. Also, if you could leave a review, that would help us out. And you can check us out on Instagram or at publiclychallenged.com. And once again, thank you so much for listening to the show.